Welcome back to 40 Crumbs Edition. Last time, we were unsuccessful in attempting to beat level 5-9, so I've skipped it, and we're now onto the final level in World 5. And for the final level of the world, we're brought over to the Zen Garden, and let me just say, the upcoming fight is very peculiar indeed. What you're seeing here is not sped up, as everything with Dr. Zomboss is now 4 times faster. He also spawns 3 random zombies at a time now, and by random, I meant literally any zombie in the game. It's straight up impossible to get enough attacking plants to defend, even with the conveyor belt being faster than usual, so our only conceivable way to actually survive is to spam jalapeno. And unless you're superhuman, cycling through the conveyor belt fast enough for enough jalapenos before we get completely overrun is absolutely impossible, so using pause buffering for this level is essentially mandatory. By the skin of my teeth, I was able to at least survive until the first cycle, but what you've seen so far has just been the first 3 of 8 buffs that Dr. Zomboss has received in 40 Crumbs Edition. And by buff, practically every aspect of Dr. Zomboss was buffed beyond the level of absurdity. The modder even made it so that the fireballs and ice balls now switch lanes every frame, so good luck keeping anything in the front alive against that. And speaking of lanes, another thing to note here is that the bottom is actually a water lane, and the conveyor belt doesn't even give lily pad, so it sure was fun to deal with zombies there using just this splash from our melon poles and ice shrooms. But what truly makes this level absolutely insane is that Zomboss now has triple the health, and you can't even pile on damage of Ice Shroom because it's also immune to that. At this rate, there's a better chance I just fall asleep before Dr. Zomboss is gonna die. Just as a reference point, speedrunners can finish the entire Zomboss fight in just 3 cycles. Meanwhile, we've made barely any progress and haven't even made a single dent after 5 cycles. Yeah, this level really puts the boss in Zomboss. It took me a solid 10 minutes, but I eventually managed to do enough damage against Zomboss to finally get to the first degradation stage. Oh, but the true battle only begins now. I'll let you see what happens next. What is that? What the heck is this? What just happened? Yes, because why not also let Dr. Zomboss clear your board at any time after the first degradation stage? But even that wasn't the craziest buff it got in this mod. Because when Dr. Zomboss throws an RV, he simultaneously summons a bungee ambush, which ends up spawning zombies in every lane. And by the way, as the level progresses, the game gets more unstable, so perma-stalling the zombies just causes us to inevitably crash and lose all our progress. Safe to say that the modder didn't want anyone beating this level. Now that's a good excuse for me to not bother with trying to beat this level, because each run is gonna take an hour minimum, and if it's just gonna crash halfway through, really no point in playing. So that's the anticlimactic end to the 5th world of the game, because obviously it needed a 6th one that makes things even worse. Welcome to World 6. The Zen Garden combines elements of the night, pool, and roof stages all together. It is here that we can finally unlock the Winter Melon, Cob Cannon, and Imitator from Crazy Dave's shop. We'll also be getting 8 more brand new custom plants throughout these last 10 levels of adventure mode. The main gimmick of World 6 is that 2 gravestones now spawn every wave, so pretty bad timing to try out the new long puff shroom, which is just a worse puff shroom but with long range. The incredibly low DPS makes it really space inefficient, so it really is only useful if you want its occasional frozen spores to slow down zombies. The other thing about this world is that we can use straight shooters like Gatling Peas again, since there's no roof slow blocking us anymore. But of course, there's a catch. Say hello to the Imitator Zombie, which creates clones of itself that split into adjacent lanes every 12.5 seconds. And yes, by clone, the clone copies also clone themselves. So yeah, I'd like to imagine that this is what evolved skeletons look like if they didn't have a limit. Let's just say that using Gatling Pea here was probably an oversight on my end. In fact, Gatling Pea ain't even useful anymore now that we have Cob Cannon unlocked. Yes, it costs literally over 1,000 sun just to get a single one down, but that's because they were massively buffed, now launching a massive barrage across the screen of 6 Cob shots at once. Perfectly balanced as all things should be. Yeah, with Cob Cannon, how many zombies there are basically doesn't matter, making them a perfect counter to Imitator zombies. But here's the thing, they're practically unaffordable without some producers galore, and when we also have to bring Flower Pot, Lily Pad, and Gravebuster, we basically end up with no slots remaining to actually support and protect them from ranged attacks, so believe me when I say World 6 ain't gonna be straightforward even if we have the US military on our side. Now, it wasn't too hard for me to figure out that just Doomshroom and Walnut were enough support to get us past their early game, and with this level being only 2 flags long, there really aren't too many graves that spawn for the grave ambushes to matter just yet. So, once I got a cop kitten set up, every wave just got absolutely eviscerated with ease, and that makes for a quick and easy way to beat the first World 6 level. But you can only get away with cop kitten spam for so long, because level 6-2 includes the one zombie in this mod that is immune to explosives. Yeah, that also makes it not a great time to unlock this new plant, called the Doomshroom God. And though it may look like a bigger Doomshroom, this plant ain't an instant kill. What it does is passively drain your sun and accumulate experience over time, which that experience can then be exchanged for a Doomshroom seed packet that we can instantly use. So, at first glance, it just seems like Cop Cannon, but even more overpowered because it costs so little to set up. But I actually think they're pretty bad, and it comes down to their extremely slow recharge, being a whole 2 minutes long, which is more than double that of any other plant we have. In the last level, we managed to defend using just Cob Cannon and Kernel Pulse, but here, I can't even survive without buying extra defense, and we even have to use Doomshroom proper just to defend early. And since setting up Doomshroom Gods takes so insanely long, we can't ever afford to lose them, and a single mishap is basically an instant loss. There's absolutely no way in hell we can survive for long enough to rebuild them in time. Yes, I am aware that just using walnuts and pumpkins can protect them from newspaper zombies' flames, but do you know what that doesn't protect us from here? Yeah, the grave ambushes are the actual problem here, because Gargantuar just end up being way too expensive to deal with, and we're basically forced to run our stockpile dry just to survive the regular Gargantuars. So if there's a Giga Gargantuar, then you're out of luck, because there's literally zero counterplay after they teleport right into the back of our defense and smash away our Doomshroom Gods. Yeah, and this position is just completely lost. Even if you max stall every wave by spamming walnuts, pumpkins, and tall nuts, the recharge is too slow to get 3 Doomshroom Gods in time for the first flag. And even then, we're rate limited by how fast we can plant flower pots, because each Doomshroom we use also requires us to use a flower pot. So yeah, even with 5 Doomshrooms in our back pocket, it ain't enough burst to actually fully defend a grave ambush. And by the second flag, good luck finding any space to actually plant your Doomshrooms when more than half the board is just covered in craters and gravestones that we can't plant on. Yeah, only in 40 Crumbs Edition can a plant literally produce infinite Doomshrooms and not be good. So it's pretty evident that we can only counter imitator zombies using Cob Cannons, but the loadout we used in 6-1 would just die miserably to Snorkel zombies, so I made some adjustments to it, which I know, no Gravebuster, so I'm limiting myself to only 4 columns of planting space, but Twin Sunflower more than makes up for it by giving us damage amplification, which allows us to efficiently kill any Giga Gargantuars that spawn from grave ambushes very quickly. And between Twin Sunflower's Purple Suns, Blowers, and Tallnut's Blades, we have just about enough chip damage against Snorkel zombies to kill them, even with them being immune to Cob Cannons. So, goes to show that we can get away with not running Gravebuster in World 6, as long as we make a defense that's compact and efficient enough. Now I'll just skip to the end since nothing new happens after the second flag anyway, so that's 2 World 6 levels down, and 8 more to go. But we're not gonna get away with not running Gravebuster for long, because this is the new zombie introduced in level 6-3. Hell, even the game is telling us that we need an answer to Graves. So, about time we bring in Winter Melons now that there are no more imitator zombies. And yes, they got the same buff as Melon Bolt to now lob multiple melons at once, meaning each Winter Melon slows down way more zombies in this mod, and more importantly, having imitator Sunshroom means we can actually afford them in the early game. Quite a lot better than the base Melon Bolt if you ask me. But you haven't seen power creep quite like the new Blockbuster plant just yet. You can't actually plant them on gravestones, but for the cost of 175 sun, you get a free Gravebuster every 14 seconds. Yeah, it might sound too good to be true, but there really isn't a catch, and I think it's just straight up better than running Gravebuster proper. There's almost no scenario where paying for each Gravebuster upfront would be cheaper than just protecting the Blockbusters for practically infinite value. And understandably so, because removing Graves will be almost impossible with the new Gravebuster zombie. It summons anywhere between 1 and 5 Graves in a 5x5 area around itself every few seconds, even on tiles where Graves usually can't be, like on top of craters and in the water. Oh, and you can't even kill them quickly since they have 2000 HP, which is enough to survive an instant kill. So we'll have to deal with all these Graves whether we like it or not. Even with multiple Blockbusters at play, it wasn't enough to deal with all the Graves, since the Graves got created so fast that we cannot keep up with our Gravebusters that get summoned in. But hey, at least Blockbusters cleared enough space for us to plant Doomshrooms, so they were still quite helpful for preventing the first flag ambush, even if they couldn't bust all the Graves to fully prevent it. Unfortunately, without enough blockbusters, it eventually just gets to the point where the Graves just start spawning right back the moment we destroy them, essentially gridlocking us and making the natural Graves forcibly spawn over our existing plants. It's pretty bad, but at least the Gravebuster zombie itself can't delete our plants to make space for new Graves. But even then, we're gonna be forced to dig up the little plants that we do have to make space for planting more Doomshrooms just to survive. Which, obviously, is not an effective strategy in the long run because we end up creating so many craters and let so many Graves pile up that eventually there won't even be space left for us to plant new flower pots. So, it's pretty clear that we need to do something different to avoid getting gridlocked like that. And well, all I did was change one thing, and that's to plant blockbusters as early as possible rather than winter melons. Yes, it may look very stupid initially because we clearly still can't outpace a Gravebuster zombie even with the extra blockbusters. But by simply limiting how fast Graves pile up, obviously, there end up being fewer Graves for us to clean up after the Gravebuster zombies eventually die. And if we can bust everything there is in the small time frame where the game is announcing a huge wave is incoming, then we're golden. Avoiding the first flag ambush is as simple as that, and we can save a ton of Doomshrooms for later on. Not only that, but because I freed up enough space to push our defense a whole column forward, I got so much more sun in this run just by having a few more sunflowers. And that extra bit of sun alone was enough for me to get a whole extra column of melon bolts in the back and set up even more blockbusters. It was so much so that I got enough of them to remove almost every grave before the second flag, and because I did not need to deal with a grave ambush, we have our path to victory. Our enormous nuclear arsenal stockpile, which is more than enough to send the zombies back to the Ice Age. Yeah, not much explanation needed for why having 8 Doomshrooms in our back pocket makes it basically impossible for us to lose in the span of one flag, and after a very much fair and balanced gameplay of us using more nukes than the US military ever had, that is level 6-3 completed on our second try, which, boy, I wish the future levels were this simple. Because if there's one zombie that will mess up the strategies we've been using, it would be the Zomboni. But let me explain what this new plant we just unlocked is first. This plant is the pea walnut. Not a peanut, not a peanut, and also not a peanut. Don't ask me why PopCap spelled the same plant in 3 different ways, but the pea walnut is quite literally a walnut that has a pea infused in it. It doesn't have much health, but when it's destroyed, it releases a burst of 30 peas all around itself. Not exactly useful for a 4th flag level of Zombonis, I'm afraid. Now, you may wonder, why can't we just use Spike Rock here? Well, I shall remind you that Zombonis spawn both on the ground and in the water in 40 Crumbs Edition, so you can already see the problem, I think. I suppose I don't really have to explain in length why having no reliable source of damage in the water is not how you play Plants vs Zombies, and it wasn't even Zombonis in the water that would end up killing us, since just the grave ambush was enough to destroy our entire life in under 10 seconds anyway. So yeah, this level ain't gonna be that straightforward. Another issue is that just spamming Gatling Peas and amplifying their damage using Twin Sunflower and Torchwood doesn't work anymore. That is because Gatling Peas do too much damage, so much so that we actually anti-stall the waves before the first flag and end up with too little time to remove all the gravestones. And as good as Gatling Peas' raw DPS is, there is absolutely no way it's gonna do enough damage to deal with a grave ambush, so we get overrun almost instantly here. So clearly, a Gatling Peas strategy ain't the play either. In fact, any setup that uses conventional attack game plans for maximizing DPS will almost certainly kill zombies in the early game too quickly and force us to deal with a grave ambush, which is just practically impossible to defend without Cop Cannon anyway, so it was realistically the only option we ever had in the first place. But even Cop Cannon isn't foolproof here. The fact that Gravebuster zombies have enough health to survive an explosive means we'll need damage amplification to avoid spending a whole extra cop shot to kill them. Problem is, we just don't get sun fast enough in the early game to set up a whole column of tall nuts and twin sunflowers and cop cannons and blockbusters all at once. Doing everything at once just means we do none of them well, and having to spend all our cop shots on just defending the grave ambush, which, by a miracle, I managed to survive and only lose 1 lawnmower against, left us without any cop shots to deal with the Gravebuster zombies. Even just delaying a few seconds to deal with them can literally be the difference between being completely fine or getting gridlocked and losing our tall nuts to the natural grave spawns. We absolutely cannot afford for this to happen, because all it takes is one Zomboni to come in an open lane and we are as good as dead about 90% of the time. Not necessarily an insta-loss, but without enough blockbusters to sufficiently remove all the graves before another flag, good luck getting lucky on the grave ambush a second time. Just one screen door protected Gargantor is enough to kill us, and it's just hopeless once we start losing our cop cannons, because Zombonis are just gonna explode our entire front line every wave. so preventing any of our tall nuts from dying is practically the name of the game in this level. And while we can't constrict our defense into 4 columns and ignore Graves entirely to avoid the gridlock problem, having to defend a full board Grave Ambush might as well be a death sentence, since Green Door protected Giga Gargantuars are nearly impossible to stop even with Pop Cannon spam. Each of these guys has the equivalent of 12,000 HP, tanking a whopping 7 explosives, and we need to do damage within 5 seconds by the first flag to get away with not running Blockbuster. It's basically unachievable. You can even bring in Ice Shroom to stall the Giga Gargantuars for a few seconds, but that is not going to give the extra damage output we need to defend them, and we'll still end up losing much of our defense. Without Gravebuster to reclaim any space we lose to Gravebuster zombies either, we are just completely cooked. Even going as far as using long puff shrimps just to edge out that early game advantage for getting as many Cop Cannons as humanly possible by the first flag won't do us much good. No amount of extra Cop Cannons will stop BS like an instantly exploding jalapeno zombie, which just happens by chance since every ambush zombie is completely random. And even if we do survive the first Grave Ambush, I need to remind you that we actually have to survive 3 or 4 of these in a row to beat the level. The chance of not a single Giga Gargantuar spawning in all these ambushes without us removing Gravestones from the board is essentially 0, so by now, it may seem pretty conclusive that we can't just ditch our Grave removal. So, the next thing I tried was ditching Twin Sunflower in favor of spamming Blockbuster off cooldown from the get-go, and that is enough to prevent the first Grave Ambush by just stalling the wave before the first flag by not using our cops. Downside is, we then have way less sand in the long run, and also having half the damage output without damage amplification will come to haunt us in the later waves, because when Zombonis start coming in with screen door protection, that's where things get bad, since now we're forced to spend 2 cop shots to kill each wave. And if we try to kill these screen doors to make Zombonis in the next wave easier to kill, it doesn't even necessarily help because even just 1 bucket of zombie can make it so that Zombonis are able to tank a whole extra cop shot. And while Tonuts may have a lot of health, they do not last forever, and we're certainly cooked if we run out of cop shots and do not answer the Zomboni spam. But if we want more stalls against Zombonis without Imitator Tallnut, the only alternative we have is using Walnut to heal up our existing Tallnuts. It's pretty scuffed, and we also need Graves to not block us off, but we don't really have space for Chompers, nor can we afford them, so this is what I had to go with. Which, to my surprise, Walnuts worked way better than I could have ever anticipated. Even when they might seem to provide healing that is seemingly inconsequential, like this one that didn't even last for more than 10 seconds, down the stretch, it brought us just enough extra time for our Tallnut to come off cooldown, preventing us from losing against the Zomboni in lane 1 here. In fact, it was so close that I had to use pause buffering just to nail the precise timing required to survive in this situation. But even though we now had enough stalling against Zombonis, just the fact that most of our Gravebusters were getting ran over because of more Zombonis being spawned at this point of the level is drastically slowing down how fast we could bust the Graves. So much so that we actually couldn't remove all the Graves in time before the 3rd flag. So after all that, we finally made it to the 3rd flag, but we just wound up losing to a Grave Ambush again. I mean, now it's just getting upsetting. In fact, I spent over 2 hours on this level, and I could not find even a single loadout that came close to working. That is when it finally dawned on me that we're finally getting a true taste of how difficult World 6 will truly be. I returned to the level after a week, and it quickly became apparent that preventing Grave Ambushes would be much harder than just stalling the zombies out. Gravebuster zombies simply outnumbered us, and we don't have space to place enough Blockbusters to bust all the Graves that spawn. And if we can't actively prevent the Grave Ambush, then our only choice is to find a way to kill the ambush zombies if we want to keep our defense safe. But if I brought in an instant kill like Doomshroom, their damage output simply isn't enough to deal with Zombonis anyway, so Cop Cannon is pretty much necessary for killing them regardless. So Doomshroom is just completely pointless here because it doesn't actually do anything to keep our Tallnuts alive for longer. And considering that Bucketheads and Screen Doors each reduce the direct damage we do to zombies by half, even Cop Cannon isn't that efficient after all. So clearly, we need to squeeze in more damage in the little space we do have, but how on earth could that even be done if we already tried Twin Sunflower and that didn't work? Well, at this point, I didn't know, so I just went off my way to brute force this through trial and error. It ain't pretty, but I needed to figure out whether changing how many Cop Cannons I had to make space for more Twin Sunflowers and Blockbusters could make a difference. I even tried fitting extra plants into the defense by utilizing the water lane where natural Graves can't spawn. And most egregiously, I even tried to put a Cop Cannon and Blockbuster in front of our Tallnuts. Yeah, I had played this level so many times I was starting to lose my mind, but I really tried everything there was to try, and every game simply ended in complete and utter failure. In fact, I was so laser focused on finding a strategy for this level that I completely lost my sense of time, and I ended up spending almost 4 consecutive hours without a break playing just this level, and I only stopped once my live stream literally crashed. This mod truly is human indeed. So, by now, I had dedicated 2 live streams towards beating this level, and even after trying for almost 6 hours, I still hadn't even come close to beating it. But I did not give up here, because I knew that unless I had truly exhausted every option I had at hand, I could still potentially make a breakthrough and beat this level once and for all. Determined to beat this level, one way or another, I dedicated time off stream just theorizing what I could change about my loadout, and that's when I finally realized something pretty unintuitive. What I figured was that I could get away with a simple and minute change, taking out Imitator Sunshroom to bring in Imitator Tallnut instead. Now, obviously, I didn't do this previously because Imitator Sunshroom was the only thing that allowed us to set up Cob Cannons fast enough to not get completely overrun in the early game. So, I look pretty stupid here for just voluntarily losing a bunch of my defense to random Conehead zombies early on because I couldn't even place a Cob Cannon to defend in time. But this is actually fine because we can just restart the level. See, we can just restart until we successfully gamble for good enough spawns early on to get away with not running Imitator Sunshroom, effectively opening up a whole extra slot for us to use. Yes, this only works like half the time, but the key is we only need to beat the level once, so I thought, surely it was worth gambling the early game to have literally double the tallnuts later on, right? Well, not really, because having a whole extra layer of tallnuts doesn't matter if what we're losing to are the gargantuars from the grave ambushes. It's not like doubling our stall doubles the effectiveness of our defense if our Cob Cannons are just dead. It's also not like we can even make use of more space to plant double the tallnuts if we don't have more blockbusters, since we just run back into the gridlock problem again. But surprisingly, the biggest issue I ran into with Imitator Tallnuts was simply their delay. Because imitators take time to transform, I can't replace a Tallnut here with an imitated one until the Zombonis are dead. But because Zombonis are so fast, you don't actually get enough time to do the replacement if they just spawn in the same lane again. And while you could brush that off as just a one-off problem or a matter of luck here, this problem consistently showed up across my runs using Imitator Tallnut and was the main reason that I didn't find it worth using at the end. So, even after coming up with a way to spare a whole extra slot, it somehow still wasn't good enough for us to beat this level. Now what do we do? Well, call me crazy, because I still didn't give up hope, and it would not be until 2 more hours later that my chat would finally convince me to try something entirely new. I had been so defeated time and time again that at this point, it didn't even matter anymore to me that I was using a strategy that would obviously not work. I really just needed some inspiration for something new that I could do. And I wanted to use Chomper as a high single target DPS plan to deal with Zombonis, but I simply could not deal with Grave Ambushes reliably without Cob Cannon. Every time, we were either just short on space for enough blockbusters, or got no answers to the Grave Ambush zombies. And you know what? That's when I basically accepted that beating this is just gonna come down to Grave Ambush RNG, and I threw Blockbuster out of the window. We can't play enough of them to fully prevent the ambush anyway, and if I still needed to spend Cob shots to defend them regardless, at some point, just using an attacking plant like Wintermelon to just save on using Cob shots in the normal waves becomes worthwhile. And this is what I call the bombs away strategy. We simply spray and pray, using all our Cob shots at once and hope it defends a full board ambush. It's complete RNG slop, and it doesn't work very well against green door protected gargantuars. I guess there was a reason after all why I was using Blockbuster in my previous runs, but I survived, so good enough, I guess. Now, I kind of messed up with timing my Cob shots on the second Grave Ambush though, and straight up didn't have enough damage to deal with Gargantuars. So this one was a complete fail, but it gave me inspiration for what to do in my next run. Instead of Wintermelon, why not Chomper with Cob Cannon, right? And you may remember, I didn't use them previously because there was no space to put them when I was using Blockbuster, which forced me to use Walnut instead, but I'm not using Blockbuster anymore, so Chomper actually makes sense here as it heals for our Tallnuts, and it costs us a whole slot less than Wintermelon, so I was like, why not just run Twin Sunflower too then? Like, we have no space for them, but my theory was that we could just use them like an instant use plan for damage amplification against the Grave Ambushes. And this looks so absurd. Like, why would you even use Twin Sunflowers if not for the sun production? But, you know, sometimes it just doesn't hurt to try, because somehow, combining that with the spray and pray strat actually allowed us to defend a full board ambush. Don't ask me how we completely avoiding hitting this Giga Gargantuar. Grave Ambushes are all just RNG anyway at the end of the day. If spray and pray is the way to maximize our odds of survival, then it doesn't matter to me whether it makes sense or not. Just saying, we're literally using 4 different sun producers in the same loadout, but not even a single one of them is for actual long-term sun production, as all we're doing is just cycling through sunshrooms on this one little tile of planting space. Yeah, that's 40 Crumbs Edition for ya right there. This extremely scuffed strategy would bring us all the way over to the second flag, which somehow, once again, by just doing spray and pray with cob cannons, we actually managed to defend a grave ambush once again despite losing an entire lane to a jalapeno zombie. And with the power of Chomper's healing and stunning, which is much better than that of Walnuts, we were able to cruise our way along to the third flag without any issues either. And all the meanwhile, we're just raking in boatloads of sun from replanting our sunshrooms over and over again. But you know how the saying goes, if you get lucky too many times, you're gonna eventually run out of luck. So even though I was able to actually fully defend the grave ambush for a third time on the third flag by spray and praying with all our cob cannons, I had a problem. I wasted all my cob shots on defending the ambush, so now I can't answer the Zombonis anymore. And choppers can't permastall multiple Zombonis at once, which means we just end up losing here despite having almost 3,000 sun in the bank to spare. But you know what? There was actually something I could do. Well, first, I have to actually make it back to the third flag, which is easier said than done, considering spray and pray isn't guaranteed to defend a full board ambush, but I must have prayed hard enough because I managed to skillfully land an extra barrage of cob on this Giga Gargantuar on the first flag to allow myself to defend that. And somehow, there wasn't even a Gargantuar that spawned from the grave ambush on the second flag, so I also got past that with spray and pray. So now, we're back in the same position again. 3,000 sun in the bank by the third flag, all our cob shots ready to be fired, and somehow, someway, no Giga Gargantuar ends up emerging from the grave ambush, and we kill everything. And guess what? I didn't even have to use my 5th cob cannon because there wasn't a Giga Gargantuar, so our problem was actually solved through just sheer luck. But I can still show you what my actual idea was. I was planning on digging up an existing cob cannon so we could make space to rebuild a new one, and obviously that would help refresh a cob shot immediately, but I guess that's unnecessary, because we have now finally figured out how to beat level 6-4. These stupid screen door zombies caused so much trouble for our cob cannons, which made this level so absurdly difficult to figure out, but I guess at the end of the day, cob cannons remain on top. Now we're finally done dealing with screen door zombies. Obviously, that's when the game decides to introduce an upgraded version of them in level 6-5. Don't even think about using Mana Shroom, by the way, because it's banned in this level. And as if things couldn't get any worse, we didn't even unlock a new custom plan for beating 6-4. Are we deadass right now? And honestly, this entire level has to be a troll, because what's unique about Mega Screen Door Zombies is that they have 10,000 HP. No, I wish I were kidding you that the literal first wave of zombies has more health combined than Dr. Zomboss himself in vanilla. Oh, and just to make sure it's even more troll, the modder also made them immune to getting slowed down by winter melons. Cause why not, right? And by the way, there's not even natural grave spawning in this level, so extra congratulations goes to me for bringing in Blockbuster. It's pretty impressive that I somehow managed to get jebaited into bringing useless plants twice, and yeah, no surprises here, I lost pretty quickly. So, change of plans. We definitely need pumpkins to stall, and chompers for the heals to stall even more, because we're definitely not doing 40,000 damage on the first wave. Believe you me. And if we're gonna have to clump up a bunch of zombies anyway, that's a job for Gloomshroom if I've ever seen one before. It's very incremental progress, and even with Twin Sunflower for damage amplification, it takes almost a whole minute for Gloomshrooms to finally start killing some of these Mega Screen Door zombies. But since Gloomshroom only hits 3 lanes at once, the one lane our first Gloomshroom can't reach will certainly have a lot more zombies built up. And slowly but surely, just the sheer number of zombies will start to overwhelm our Chompers and Pumpkin's heal, eventually breaking the stall, and we simply lose our defense from there onwards. So now what do we do? Well, for one, we actually have a better stalling plant than Chomper, and that is Ice Shroom, which fortunately does work here, unlike Winter Melons. And to not get overwhelmed early on, we can just sacrifice a Lawnmower. The game mechanic is that zombies don't spawn in lanes where Lawnmowers were just used, so losing one actually guarantees that any new zombies will only come in the 3 other ground lanes for a few waves. And I guess you can see why that's pretty helpful with Gloomshroom at play here. And once we have our column of Gloomshrooms fully set up, then the level basically becomes a joke because the Mega Screen Door zombies will practically stand no chance of actually breaking through our defense as long as we just keep spamming Ice Shrooms off cooldown. With damage amplification, not even flag zombies can live against this defense for more than a few seconds. And yeah, the entire level, other than on flag waves, literally just sends Mega Screen Door zombies. It actually just doesn't get as troll as this level, so I'm not gonna bore you too much and just skip to the end. Not really a hard level at all once I figure out the early game, but this level was certainly an experience.